You're listening to Industry Talks on Design in Focus, a new multimedia channel serving CID. CID, Creative, Innovation and Design. Listen to representatives, practitioners and leaders on topics like industry development, skills, methods, movements, tools, concepts, projects, events, and much more. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Industry Talks on Design in Focus. Today I'm speaking with Edward Bray, and we'll be talking about the music and video game industry. Hi, Edward. Lovely to have you on the show today. Can you start by telling me a little bit about yourself and how you got into this industry?
Absolutely. Very happy to be here as well, by the way. So my path into the video games industry was not by any means an academic one. Specifically, what I do is provide music and sound effects on a contractual basis to game developers and publishers as well. So my pursuit of a career in video games music was very much fueled by an old, long-standing passion for both video games and music writing and production. So I picked up video games from a very young age, as I'm sure many others can relate to. And in my teens, I picked up the guitar and drums. So as I say, I never studied music composition or anything like that. I've worked in many industries, but prior to this, the music industry and the video games industry were not included in that under that umbrella, shall we say. So prior to this, most recently, I was actually working in the medical industry, the medical devices industry in marketing. And I kind of looked at my career trajectory moving forward and what the prospects would be. And I thought to myself, well, do I really want to be doing this till retirement, another 40 years or so? And the answer was, unfortunately, no. Not to knock on that by any means, because we need all sorts of people in all sorts of jobs, right? But I just found it wasn't for me. So what ensued was a rather busy period of trying to combine the two and trying to make my way in doing music and trying to branch that over into video games. I had a lot of contacts in the music industry, having played in bands and having written solo material over the years. But what I quickly found was that trying to branch over into video games was an entirely different world altogether. So it involved a lot of reaching out to game developers and publishers, trying to sell wares from a body of work that I didn't really have just yet. So it was a lot of building up the portfolio, reaching out to people, trying to establish rapport, going to these networking events, all the usual entrepreneur stuff, really. So yeah, and it's going well so far, I'm grateful to say.
Can you tell me a little bit about what you do? Can you give a short explanation or an extensive explanation of what you currently do?
Absolutely. So I just wrapped up a project that was 18 months, almost 2 years in duration, wherein I provided like a score of 3 hours, so 3 hours of original music to contract, and provided all the sound effects for the game as well. So that's predominantly what I do. I will also assist in the implementation of the music and sound effects at times, though most of the time it's music that I'm writing, to brief that. Yeah.
Yeah. And implementing that, do you mean then creating it or like actually putting it into the video?
So quite often putting it into the game directly. It's not a given, though there will be times where I'll be asked on the best way in which to implement the music as well. So that will involve working in game engines such as Unity or perhaps Unreal Engine. I do a lot of stuff with Wise as well, which is specifically geared towards putting music and sound effects into games. So it's some level of coding involved too, which I didn't ever imagine I'd be doing. And I don't think my secondary school mathematics teacher did either. But yeah, that's an aspect of it as well. It's not my favorite part of it, but it does come with the territory. So it's a necessary evil as far as I'm concerned, you know?
I find Unity such a challenging interface. Like, I mean, of all the creative apps out there, Unity is just like, I've tried now doing a few games, and it's just like, wow,
Really?
Incredibly complex.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that feels that way. Yeah, no, I agree. There's other implementation softwares you can use. There's something called Fmod that I really like, and that, given my familiarity with music production software, that's a lot more in line with what one would expect with an audio processing engine. But Unity, I agree, you're dealing with a lot of geometry and when it comes to Unity, the placement of an object within a certain dimension, or on a certain plane within the dimension, that sort of thing. So it scrambles my head as well. The people that I work with, the developers, they know it inside out. And I'm not sure I'll ever get to that level. I know just enough to be dangerous, shall we say.
Can you tell me about the differences between the video game industry and the music industry?
Certainly. So with direct regards to what I do, as opposed to an independent musician or a band, shall we say, they have a lot more creative creative agency, for better or worse. So they'll decide the artistic direction, they'll decide what they're going to write about, what genre they're going to write within, and they also, as a result of that, they can pigeonhole themselves a little bit because they'll develop a fan base and then they'll have to stick within what they've already created in the past or innovate it just enough so they can maintain the existing fan base but hopefully build upon it. So there's a lot of pressure on them to within their creativity. They have a lot of more control but a lot more pressure in that regard as well. And I suppose the difference between that and what I do is I always write to brief. So I will never approach a developer and I'll never I can give advice and suggestions as to what genre we can perhaps explore or what genres, though it's quite often dictated by the artistic direction and the emotional subtext and the narrative and those sorts of things. So I won't receive, but we'll develop together a list of requirements that shall I say, a sonic palette that we'll stick within and paint from, if you like. So it's a lot different in that regard. That's not to say there's no creativity involved, but the decision making and the artistic expression by virtue of what I do is dictated by the developers and the creators of the game as opposed to what I bring to the table. My creativity comes into it through the means of execution as opposed to the direction, shall we say. So that's quite a key difference, I think. Yeah.
I think that's quite, for me, creativity has got these different slots and different components because you can be strategically creative as well as expressionally creative.
Absolutely.
There's always this conversation between art and design because art is for the expression and design is for the purpose. But I think both are creative. Both are expressions of creativity, just applied differently. So I wouldn't say one is more creative than the other. And are there any other misconceptions perhaps in the industry like this?
Misconceptions about the video games industry? We could probably have the entire chat about this, to be honest. So I think that quite often when I tell people that I work within the video games industry, they think it's all fun and games. Not everyone, but a lot of people do. They say, oh, so you must spend a lot of time playing video games, right? Like, yeah, totally. No, not at all. The last thing I want to do after spending upwards of 16 hours in this room is go downstairs and fire up the Xbox or PlayStation and crack out a few rounds of Harry Potter or Doom or what have you. Although occasionally I'll still try and make the time. But that's one misconception. Another misconception would be that I suppose that it's easy to get into. I have fellow musicians who say, very accomplished musicians at that, mind you. They'll say, oh, video games music, yeah, I could do that. I want to get into that. And as I alluded to before, there's very little crossover. Like none of the contacts that I made in the music industry have ever really given me, and it's not through any fault of theirs, they're just entirely separate. But it's just an entirely different industry in a different realm, right? Yeah. So there's that misconception as well, that there can be the perception that it's easy to get into. There's also the misconception that creativity will take you everywhere that you need to get within video games because it's a creative undertaking, or that's the perception outwardly. And that's a very infinitesimal part of the entire equation. I'd say, as with any other industry, the two most important things in video games development are communication and time management, as with anything else, right? Anything else within tech or what have you. So that's another misconception. Another one that I've heard is that it's glamorous at times, and it certainly can feel that way when you go into the only event of the year and there's an open bar and a dinner included, but most of the time it's just being sat in the same room 360 days a year, sending stuff over to the client and hoping that they approve it and then seeing it go out into the world. So it can be quite monastic and hermetic as opposed to glitzy and glamour. So those are some of the misconceptions.
All right. Are there any special considerations for people to consider about music and video game industry?
Yeah, so when it comes to developing games, there's a heck of a lot of considerations, a lot of things that unless you envelop yourself in it, you wouldn't really think about. You know, that people complain about, or people tend to complain at times about the same games coming out over and over again, or, oh, here's another shooter game, here's another racer game. So one consideration would be the market demand. How do you do something that can live happily within an existing genre whilst still bringing something unique, a unique offering to the table to get people drawn in? And that's not a knock on franchises like Call of Duty, for example, that have been following a very similar format for years and years, very successfully at that. Though they have an established brand, so people will buy it regardless. But trying to do something new and come to the table and bring in fresh idea, but still exist within a genre that people are going to be familiar with, or at least familiar enough with, that's a big consideration for sure. Yeah. Then, in a more pragmatic sense, you've got the mechanics and design of the game, so making it intuitive, making it interesting and different, going back to what I was saying before, but without making it unfamiliar and alien, so that you can pick it up easily, but it still offers something new. And by that margin as well, there's the technical considerations too. You know, is what you're doing even possible? Is it too computationally expensive for that matter? Can you even get it running? That sort of thing, due to hardware limitations or what have you. Other considerations. Monetization, which is something that I'm very glad I have no part in, because that's a whole other barrel of monkeys in itself. My only monetization strategy is write the music and get paid, hopefully on time. So I'm very grateful for that. And the others, are just more generic things like project management, QA, marketing, all that usual good stuff. It's not necessarily exclusive to games, but is important nonetheless, for sure. Yeah.
I see very many correlations between the game industry and the digital product industry. I think in websites you have, digital products, you have very much the same mechanics at play, and I think what you're saying can be applied to so many more fields than just the video game and music industry. What do you think is the value and impact of what you do in business and society?
Oh, it's without sounding too grandiose about myself, you mean?
Well, I mean, it doesn't. If it's grand, it's grand. You don't have to be grandiose, but some things do have value and impact, and it's worth it to explore it.
Totally.
Yeah. So humbly take the stage and answer as you can.
I'll do my best to impart as much humility into it as possible. I mean, in fairness, there's so many talented people that work on bringing these games to market, and what I do is I would say is an important aspect of that, but it's one sprocket in a very large machine, right? So what I could definitely speak to is the impact of video games on society and business at large. And that would be obviously the financial aspect of it. I'm not sure if you're aware of this or if the viewers and listeners will be aware of this, but at present, and this is a trend that looks set to continue, the video games industry is worth more financially, meaning the annual turnover and annual spend is more than the films and music industry combined. Those two combined, it's more. It's crazy, right? So the implication, or rather the effect of that, the benefit of that, is the sheer amount of jobs that are created, right? Because it's not just the development of the games themselves, it's the hardware, it's the legal teams, it's the marketing teams, it's the events teams, it's everyone within these companies. So the jobs that are created are massive. And then that even extends to streaming platforms like Twitch and Mixer, those kinds of things. There's jobs being created there too. And I suppose that point ties quite nicely into the other thing that I would mention, and that's the social and community aspect of it too, right? We, as you might remember, as I'm sure everyone would rather forget, we just went through a period of time where everyone was home-ridden due to, involuntarily. I think everyone knows what I'm referring to. And I think that video games during that time were a really integral part of people staying connected to one another. It's not the only method by which people did that, but I do think that it was able to it was a form of escapism, as video games always are, but that added social component, being able to play with your friend that you would otherwise typically be able to see on a Friday night or at the weekend, you were then able to play games with them, right? So I think that was a really a really valuable thing for that, and not just at that moment in time, but making friends all over the world. You know, I know a couple who met playing World of Warcraft online, and they've been married for years now. So there's so even that works for romance as well, apparently. And then there's obviously the entertainment aspect of it too, right? But that's not exclusive to games. One other thing that's actually quite cool, a little bit specific, but hopefully you'll indulge me. One thing that I saw at a conference quite recently, which I thought was awesome, was there was a company that was developing, or rather utilizing VR technology, developed in video games for medical training purposes. So this gentleman had, so he'd created this VR experience, an academic one at that, whereby an aspiring surgeon or doctor could experience what it was like to be in an operating theatre, or be confronted with a patient who had suffered a head trauma or a without getting too graphic, some sort of physical ailment, right? And so the applications for the technology that's under development, or rather was developed for games, there's so many applications that you could apply that stuff. So stuff that people don't even really think about, you know?
Yeah, not just the video games, because my video game knowledge is like this, but the gaming or entertainment of game industry has really like taken a root everywhere, because I think, you know, we're at this stage where the first kids who grew up with Game Boys are now, you know, like leading positions, and that's why you see this gamification everywhere. I've designed a gamified workshop called the 4 Suits of Design.
Very cool.
Yeah, I think, you know, whenever I speak about it, people are very excited. I'm still to give it. I've just designed it. But more and more you see that people are calling for gamified professional experiences, because they also learn better when they have fun while learning. It's not just like, oh, I've got to learn something, but it's like you understand it. Especially, you know, what I do is I have a role-playing part of the workshop, and because you're playing that role, you actually get to synthesize the information a lot deeper. And
Absolutely.
then also, you know, talking about VR and AR in the metaverse, and, you know, this digital world we're supposed to be entering soon. I think gamification will just, keep on going as you say it has been going, or you testified that it has.
Absolutely. I would strongly bank on it for sure. And you're absolutely right. That sense of immersion and immediate feedback that only gamification can offer, really, I think it's unparalleled in terms of the possibilities for learning and imparting knowledge. I really do. So I think that you're definitely, well, you obviously know what you're doing. You don't need me to tell you that, but I think it's a really good idea, a good approach that you're taking there for sure. Yeah. And to your point of people that, you know, games, there are so many people that connect to games and don't even realize it, right? That everyone's a gamer. Well, not everyone, but the majority of people are gamers, and some of them don't even realize it. The number one medium for game consumption is actually the mobile phone. Like my mum isn't a gamer, but she's been playing a Scrabble derivative for the last 5 or 6 years, you know? So yeah, it goes further than people think.
When I knew Facebook had just come out, and I used to play all of these games on Facebook. I think it was like Vampire Wars and Yeovil.
Right.
And I don't know, I had these nerd friends, and I was like, my games, and they're like, oh, that's not gaming. I'm like, that's gaming. Refuse to acknowledge that Facebook games are games. It's either Xbox, PlayStation, or not even the Wii. The Wii for them was too prissy. But anyway, it's been a really interesting conversation, Edward. I had a lot of fun talking with you. Our session is running out. So do you have any final words you would like to say, or anything, 5 minutes, a story, or parting words?
No, I'd just like to thank you once again for your time, Candice. It's been a real pleasure, and it's been nice to communicate some of the aspects of what it is that I do, and show people a little bit of what's behind the curtain, how the sausage is made, so to speak. So it's been really cool, and it's also made me think of things in a slightly different way. And what more could you ask for from this sort of thing?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much for your time, Edward, and have a great day. And everybody else, thank you very much for watching, and we'll have the next episode out soon.
It's been my pleasure. Let's catch up soon. Take care.